This video is brought to you in part by Squarespace. More on them in just a bit. So there was a Dig Dug MMO, a massively multiplayer online game based on this. That's somehow not the weirdest thing you're going to hear today, or even this very minute, because this Dig Dug MMO is not based on the iconic arcade game that released 40 years ago this year. It's based on Dig Dug 2, a game you probably never even conceptualized existing, and a game that plays nothing like one of the most successful arcade games ever. Also, he's divorced. Dig Dug is a divorced, deadbeat dad, and that is, in fact, canon. It's only recently that I even found out there was a second Dig Dug. I used to love playing the first game back when I was probably 4 or 5 by way of the N64 Namco Museum cartridge, and I'm that special type of idiot that usually would have found out about the expansive batshit Dig Dug lore that actually exists by now, given how much inane research I sometimes tend to do. I only discovered Dig Dug 2 by accident, though. I was playing the Switch's NES collection at 3 AM because I'm a functioning adult, and because it was 3 AM, I clicked the game not even realizing the Roman numerals at the end. So when it played less like this, and more like this, I knew I had some work to do. It's only gonna get weirder from here somehow, so let's start by going back to 1982. In case you've never played it before, Dig Dug is one of those arcade games that perfectly encapsulates the addictive, easy-to-play, hard-to-master nature of good old coin gobblers. Your goal in every level is just to dig through the underground and kill every monster roaming in the stage before moving on to the next one. The game's only got 2 inputs, one of which is, moving, 2 types of enemy, these little red guys called pukas, and these fire-breathing dinosaurs that I'm pretty sure were inspired by Croc, and 2 ways to take them down. You can either press the game's lone button and make Digless Douglas himself shoot out a little pump that stabs into enemies and inflates them until they explode, thereby creating a fetish for dozens, or you can crush them underneath unstable boulders, creating a different kink now that I think about it. Every new stage has its own handcrafted level layout, forcing you to plan out your strategy and ideal route, but you can't take too much time and leave the enemies sitting in their little trenches because they'll quickly start, let's call it ghosting their way through the dirt so that they can chase you down. And that's Dig Dug. That's the entire game. There's a really fun level of dynamic strategy to it in that sort of Pac-Man kind of way, where you've got to keep shifting around corners to avoid enemies catching up to you. The monsters have pretty consistent movement patterns up until they start chasing, of course, so it's easy to keep your cool until your whole game plan crumbles in real time, or you accidentally crush yourself with a rock or something. Again, easy to learn, hard to master. There's a reason Dig Dug performed as well as it did. Which brings us to Dig Dug 2, which hit Japanese arcades 3 years later in 1985, and for almost 2 decades only ever existed in North America by way of its 1989 NES release. December 1989, to be specific, 2 months before Super Mario Bros. 3 for reference. So if you're like me and never knew this game existed until now, that's why this game very much came and went. A disappointment or failure of a game by most indications, and yet the game with perhaps the most influence on the rest of the Dig Dug sequels that came after it. Strange. Here our hero once again has to kill these same 2 types of enemies, but this time on the surface rather than underground. You can still inflate enemies to death for a lower score bonus, but the real meat of Dig Dug 2, if there is any, is sinking the entire island into the ocean. By slamming down these stakes placed around each level, you'll create a fault line in the direction you're aiming. The monsters can't move past these fault lines without doing that weird ghosting thing, giving you a chance to create a little bit of a maze on the fly during a chase and buy yourself some time. And once a chunk of Earth is completely split off from the larger landmass, it collapses into the water below, killing anything and everything still standing on it. If you're confused as to why this game is so wildly different from what made the original such a success, it is worth remembering the context of early 80s gaming. Games, and arcade games especially, were rapidly evolving in a world where your quarters are going towards only the cutting edge, the coolest, newest, most fun thing. Simply expanding on a game's mechanics or design might be seen as too safe, too boring to make money. Even in console gaming, there was a hesitation not to just flip over the table when designing a sequel at this point. It wasn't until the later years of the decade that sequels really started normalizing around the core ideas of the original. There are, of course, some exceptions to this. For example, Miss Pac-Man was hugely successful, and it's just Pac-Man but better and with new levels, but that's a very unique case since Namco didn't develop that game. That was made by Midway for the US specifically, without Namco's consent. There's a whole legal fiasco involving Miss Pac-Man even to this day, and that's why Namco just kinda pretends she doesn't exist anymore. Pac-Man got a new wife. If you want an idea of what an official Pac-Man sequel looked like, here's Pac-Land, the 1984 Pac-Man side-scrolling platformer game that, according to Pac-Man's creator, Shigeru Miyamoto once told him Shigeru Miyamoto once told him directly inspired Super Mario Bros. Why does this keep happening to me? And for what it's worth, Dig Dug 2's idea actually is interesting. I just wish it were more fun in practice. The controls are somehow clunkier than the relatively smooth but still a little bit clunky it was the 80s original, in part because the direction in which you're aiming matters for creating the cracks on the map, and half the time it doesn't quite feel like you can turn around to adjust yourself without moving to that other direction and then having to readjust again anyway because now you're too far from the stake in the ground to be able to actually press it down. Add that to the inconsistency in whether you'll teeter on the edge for a moment as part of the map falls away, or whether the game just decides that you're gonna drown today, and you get a game that doesn't live up to a neat idea. Especially here in the US, on a home console in 1989. I can't imagine how many kids ended up disappointed with this being the game their unknowing parents threw under the tree on Christmas. It's probably not many, since I don't think the NES game sold that well at all, but there's probably still one of you out there, and that pivotal moment in your life is probably what ruined your future and led to your wife leaving you 30 years later. Just like Dig Dug himself. Yeah, so let's talk about some Dig Dug lore for a second. By the way, I'm very likely the first person in history to speak the words Dig Dug lore in that order. Please subscribe, this is all I have. So if you're envisioning Dig Dug the man as this middle-aged dude that peaked decades ago and is still holding on to that single win in his life, good news, canonically that is true. See, in the late 90s, well over 15 years after Dig Dug's heyday, a designer named Yasuhito Nagaoka sprouted the idea for a Dig Dug 3, starring Dig Dug's son. This idea quickly morphed into a completely separate series once he brought it to Hideo Yoshizawa, the director of the original Ninja Gaiden games and the creator of the Klonoa series. Soon after, some other staffers came on board, including one of Klonoa's artists. By the way, this project wasn't actually greenlit by Namco yet, they just kinda made the whole game and planned everything out, including focus testing, before telling their bosses what was going on. This project, formerly Dig Dug 3, would become Mr. Driller, a series that spawned over a dozen sequels since its original 1999 release, most of them only coming out in Japan. One of the ideas that did end up sticking around from that original concept is that this game stars Susumu Hori, one of the sons of Dig Dug's original hero, Taizo Hori. In fact, arcade success runs in this kid's blood because his mom is the hero in another Namco arcade game known as Baraduke, or Alien Sector here in the West. She even did the whole, wait, Samus is a girl end of game reveal 14 months before Metroid came out, and then she settled down, met and married Taizo, they had 3 kids together, and she divorced him because apparently he's kind of a deadbeat dad. I'm not joking, this is all canon, look it up. In the Mr. Driller games, Taizo is depicted as a bit of a spotlight hog, his long past days of being a world-saving hero now well behind him. He's frequently just not there for his kids, because he'd rather travel the world. This is not where you expected this video to go. That said, he does show up in many Mr. Driller games as a playable character. For example, here's him being Indiana Jones in a deadly theme park. Yeah. In case you think this is all some non-canon spin-off territory unrelated to the Dig Dug timeline, no, there's an official Dig Dug game that formally unifies the Dig Dug and Mr. Driller lore, Dig Dug DS. Released in 2005, this game combines the art style and presentation of the Mr. Driller games and Taizo's characterization there with Dig Dug 1 and 2's gameplay, put together. The lengthy opening cutscene, because Mr. Driller is a surprisingly loquacious series for a bunch of simple puzzle games that are only like an hour long each, shows Dig Dug being jealous and annoyed at all of the success, fame, and adulation that his sons received after saving the world from, I'm serious here, giant falling blocks 3+ times in the prior few years. So when the opportunity presents itself for him to save a country from giant monsters, he jumps on it, not even telling his son where he's going, and just kind of butting his head into the fray against the confused resistance of a bunch of government officials who have zero idea what this Dig Dug incident he keeps referring to is. Now, you might be wondering how one could easily combine Dig Dug 1 and 2's gameplay into one approach, given that they're pretty different games. The answer is, it's not easy, nor is it very good, sadly. The top screen shows the overhead perspective just as we saw in Dig Dug 2, stakes in the ground and everything, just also with a giant monster roaming around and a bunch of holes in the ground that each house a large Dig Dug 1 level on the bottom screen. Unlike in Dig Dug 2, there aren't really many ways to drive the stakes deeper and create fault lines without going into the Dig Dug 1 areas and painstakingly snaking your way underneath each spike to weaken the dirt. So much of the Dig Dug 1 side of the game is you killing most of the enemies to get them out of your way, and then slowly doing this several times. But you've got to be careful to wait before dropping the final spike that'll send a chunk of the island sinking into the ocean, because again, the monster you've got to kill is slowly roaming around the overworld, and you want to wait to get him into the right spot so that he does go into the water. In later levels of the game, and by later levels I mean starting around level 7 of this 15 level, 1 hour, maybe 2 hours max game, the monster will sometimes try to drive a spike into the ground itself if you're underneath said spike as an attempt to crush you, but otherwise, there's not really much crossover or cohesion between these two disparate halves of the game. Dig Dug DS is full of little power-ups and nods that reference the other classic Namco games that are usually featured in all those Namco Classics collections, and given how many new obstacles it introduces on the Dig Dug 1 side of the game, it could have been a really cool idea, but much like Dig Dug 2 itself, the execution simply isn't good, and it leads to a game that's not really difficult given the plethora of power-ups and extra lives that you'll constantly receive. It's just tedious despite only being maybe 2 hours long. Some of those power-ups, by the way, they're Mr. Driller himself, remember that's Dig Dug's son, doing some auto-scrolling shoot-em-up micro-levels for some reason, or driving around like it's Namco's pole-position arcade game, just trying to further distract or slow down the boss, but not really doing anything else. I don't know why these are really here. It also seems like his son helping out actively annoys Taizo because, again, he wants the fame and adulation to himself. What a great dad. I'll stick with Big Dug as my dad, thanks. Now, there are 2 more main series Dig Dug games left to cover before we talk about that Dig Dug MMO, or the official browser-based Namco dating sim made by the Homestuck creator. I fucking hate myself. But before we do, let's talk about how you can make your own browser-based dating sims with this video's sponsor, Squarespace. Well, I don't know if you could make a dating sim using Squarespace, but you can definitely try, and either way you're going to end up with a really good website. We live in a world where people are creating more than ever before. Think about how many folks you know that have started podcasts or channels or are finally diving into that hobby they've talked about for years. No matter what you're looking to create, make sure you've got a website to back it up. And what better way to do that than Squarespace? Squarespace makes it easier than ever to put together your site. Just select from a list of themes, adjust or drag over the different modules and customize them to your liking, and click save. Want a custom storefront for your products? Check. Want custom member-only areas? Easy to set up email campaigns, detailed analytics, all that good stuff? Check. It only took me probably half an hour when I started poking around with Squarespace to go from a completely blank slate to a site I was genuinely happy with. It's pretty cool, and I've been able to pick right back up to add new landing pages or tweak things. It's genuinely so malleable. So make sure to check out squarespace.com/goldenbolt to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. Thanks again to Squarespace for sponsoring this video. Let's get back to it. Around the same time that Mr. Driller dropped, the real Dig Dug 3 also released exclusively on Windows, that being Dig Dug Deeper. It's just a 3D remake of Dig Dug, essentially, though like every other Dig Dug property, it takes after Dig Dug 2 for some godforsaken reason by having an above-ground perspective at the start of each level. I don't know why that's the thing that caught on with these games, I really truly don't. Fair warning though, like a lot of older PC games, it seems to be a bit tough getting this one to even work nowadays. Even with a virtual machine running Windows XP, I couldn't get the thing to install, so I can't say much more about it other than that just by looking at it, you'd be better off watching the Robot Chicken Dig Dug skit. It's a far better 3D adaptation.
I want you to have my bicycle pump because I love you.
Fully death, you monster! I loved you too, Bill.
Now, just a couple years before that, and before Mr. Driller showed how bad of a person Dig Dug is, comes probably the neatest Dig Dug game overall, Dig Dug Arrangement. This released in 1996 alongside the Namco Classics Collection arcade machines, and it's a simple and to-the-point sequel to, thank God, Dig Dug 1, featuring 50 levels, a new art style, and a bunch of new power-ups, new enemies. It's the Dig Dug 2 we probably would have wanted instead of Dig Dug 2. Now, because it's Dig Dug, I can't say too much about it because at its core, it's still the same game, just now with some enemies that explode, some other rocks and obstacles that have unique effects like lava, giant boss enemies that you shoot with laser guns, you know, the usual. The quarter-munching difficulty does get a little bit insane by the end though, like they just toss a dozen plus enemies at you at once in wide open areas and you've just gotta figure it out immediately or lose. But if you can find a free play machine somewhere in the world somehow, or if you're playing the single Namco Collection home release that has this game, that's not really an issue and it makes it funny more than anything. Because this video is already well off the rails anyway, that home collection for reference is fittingly named Namco Museum. You might be wondering which one. I'm not going to tell you. No, this one is the one that released on PS2, GameCube, and Xbox, but not the Namco Museum 50th Anniversary game. Again, great naming conventions. That one released a couple years later on the same set of consoles, but that's a different game that doesn't have the arrangement versions of Dig Dug, Pac-Man, and others. There's also a totally different Dig Dug arrangement with the same name because of fucking course there is, which is part of a different Namco Museum because of fucking course it is. This one being the Namco Museum Battle Collection on PSP. This different version of Dig Dug Arrangement did end up getting ported to a different Namco Museum game because of fucking course it did. 2008's Namco Museum Virtual Arcade released only on Xbox 360, but only the disc version has Dig Dug Arrangement. This is a cry for help. But at last, now that we've reached the year 2008, we can talk about the one Dig Dug to rule them all. Dig Dug Island, a Japan-only browser-based Dig Dug MMO created as part of an attempt to make another type of Namco Museum collection, but this time around featuring online multiplayer recreations and variants of some of those Namco classics. Rather than starting with, I don't know, Pac-Man, Dig Dug was the first one to the table, and rather than figuring out, I don't know, a gameplay style reminiscent of the one Dig Dug game everybody enjoyed, the main gameplay is a 4-player cooperative Dig Dug 2. And rather than relying on host-based matchmaking, Dig Dug Island used dedicated servers for this to encourage players to link up with random others online and foster this sense of Dig Dug community or something. Although Dig Dug 2 was the impetus for me doing some 3am research into this series, it's finding this game that drove me to turn all of this into a video because the phrase Dig Dug MMO I thought would be the most insane part of this story. Oh boy, was I wrong. In addition to this cooperative mode, you could also customize your own little Dig Dug Island, hence the name, with free unlockable cosmetics, or premium cosmetics because of course they were premium cosmetics. Essentially, this had all the makings of an early 2010s Facebook game, which makes it incredible that this game both beta tested, released, and then shut down before something like Farmville came out. This game, as you'd probably expect from a Dig Dug MMO, shut down after just over 11 months. Thankfully, some brave Japanese browser-based MMO gamers out there captured footage of this game and archived it so you can see that both this game is real and that I'm not lying to you, and so that you can also see why it shut down almost immediately. Also, fun fact, since I mentioned Farmville, there's a Farmville 3 now. It came out in 2021. I learned this while doing research, so now you have to learn it too. There are a couple non-canon Dig Dug appearances that came out in the early to mid-2000s as well, including 2 Japan-only Namco crossover tactics games. Namco Super Wars on the WonderSwan, because of course there was a Namco crossover tactics game on the WonderSwan. What else would there be? And Namco Cross Capcom on the PS2. The latter also features what I think might be the only on-screen interaction we ever see between Dig Dug and his ex-wife. Thank God there's an English fan translation of this one, because I need to see this at some point. Also, this game was made by Monolith Soft. You know, the former Namco studio later acquired by Nintendo, the studio that made Xenoblade, and then later maybe saved Nintendo in the post-Wii U era by making Breath of the Wild's overworld possible to begin with. I didn't expect some fucking Croc-esque butterfly effect implications from Dig Dug, but here we are. This game's actually a spiritual predecessor, by the way, to the Project Crosszone games the studio also later developed, and yet these games aren't the weirdest Dig Dug crossovers out there. That title goes to Namco High, an official, as far as I'm concerned, canon, browser-based, free-to-play dating sim where you play as the cousin to Katamari's Prince of All Cosmos and try to date different Namco characters such as the ship from Galaga. I could probably end the video right there, but it gets better because you can also romantically pursue Dig Dug's son Susumu, aka Mr. Driller, Donko, which adds a new meaning to the phrase bang the drum, and thankfully classics like Pac-Man and Dig Dug are the older teachers and staff. In fact, Dig Dug is the principal, joined by his assistant principal / muscle, King from Tekken. I could still probably end the video with that, but it gets better, because 12 of the 18 dateable characters in this game were premium DLC, including 3 characters from Homestuck, because this game was written by Homestuck's creator. And it gets better than that. You can find this game for free now, as long as you can play it on a browser that still supports it. For example, Firefox worked for me, but Chrome did not. But back in 2013, the full game would have cost you $15, all the way up to $500 if you wanted the special edition of this browser-based dating sim that came with a diploma, a class ring, a Letterman jacket, and more. And you thought Tekken's frame data DLC was bad. Namco High is a whole can of worms beyond Principal Dig Dug. Maybe one day I'll drink up the courage to cover that thing, but for my own sanity's sake, I'll leave it at this heartwarming, again definitely canon exchange between Principal Dig Dug and his son. Dad, I just wanted to dig. I know, son, but the only good digging you can do now is digging the hole to bury that part of yourself in. I promise, son, you'll feel so much better. A life lesson we can all take to heart. Maybe he's not such a bad dad after all. Thanks, Dig Dug.
Yes, we will.